All right, welcome to TIL Talks with Chris White, where we talk TILs, tumor infiltrating lymphocytes, and all advanced cell and gene therapies, both with patients and caregivers, along with industry leaders. Let's get going. As a reminder, I am not a medical professional or medical expert. I am only a professional and expert on my story and my experience. If you are needing or seeking medical advice or assistance, please reach out to your care team. Heads up, this is part 1 out of 2, so stay tuned for the second half following this episode. In today's episode, I'm talking with Mr. Bill Heyman. Bill is a melanoma patient survivor due to a clinical trial through the NIH and is a TIL therapy treatment recipient. We connected through social media by way of advocacy, and I am very grateful to have Bill on TIL Talks today. Here we go. So what's up, my man? Give me the elevator pitch about you and your background, and let's talk some TILs.
Okay, talking TILs. So my name's Bill Hyman. I live in Minneapolis area, and actually right now I'm in Arizona, spending the winter, avoiding the cold weather and snow. Let's see, I am a 14 this year will be 14-year survivor of melanoma. So I was first diagnosed in 2011. I had a mole that grew inside my face. I went in, kind of coincidentally, I went in for my biopsy, and my wife and I went for spring break to Arizona. So we were actually staying at the Camelback Resort in Scottsdale. And while I was waiting for the results of that mole, and I had no idea, it was scary. It was, very much weighed on my mind. I was expecting my dermatologist to call me, but it probably was good that he waited until after we were back home from vacation for him to tell me the news that it was melanoma. So it's the call that none of us want to hear. It's scary and frightening, and you don't know what to expect at that. And, things could go awry very quickly, as we all know, as, as melanoma patients. The first thing is I needed to have the wide excision of the mole, where they take, I think, like an inch around or whatnot, as well as a sentinel lymph node biopsy, where they inject, I think it's a radioactive dye during the surgery, and see where your lymph nodes are. And then they'll take, like, I think in my case, they took 4 of the lymph nodes and they did further biopsy. And what they discovered, I got called maybe a week or so later saying that 3 of my lymph nodes that they took out were clear. Well, first of all, my margins were clear on the excision, which was good. 3 of my lymph nodes were clear. One had I think 0.5 millimeter micromet in it. So it's like, okay, well, it's good that it's small, super small, but it's bad that it actually had spread from the initial mole, the primary lesion. So because of that, I think they staged me at 8. So this was spring, early summer 2011. And at the time, when you were at stage 3 in 2011, there wasn't much they could really do. The key treatment that you would get was injectable interferon A or alpha. And so the type of interferon was called PEG interferon, which I think basically I gave myself the injection and then it just lasted for a long time. Yeah. And the injection was every week. And it was actually really kind of annoying because I take the injection and it really made me kind of feel ill and tired and so forth. But fortunately, I think it was only once a week. So I do it on like a Sunday evening or something before I would have to start my work week. So anyway, I was doing that for probably 11 months. And at about the 11th month period, I had this incision along my neck where they took out the sentinel lymph node. I started feeling lumps right along the incision marker. I called the nurse. I'm like, I'm feeling these lumps. They're like, it's probably nothing, but come on in. We'll take a look and we'll see. So I went in to the see the nurse, and the nurse felt them, and they're like really hard BBs, about the size of a pea. And because they were so hard, they weren't like cysts, they weren't soft, they were hard. Like, we better send you in for another biopsy. So I went in for, I think it was a CT guided biopsy into those, and the biopsy came back that it was in fact melanoma. So at that point, we needed to figure out what the next steps were. And the next step turned out to be a CLND, complete lymph node dissection. And a complete lymph node dissection is where they basically opened up my neck and they took out like 38 of my lymph nodes. I don't really have any lymph nodes on this side of my neck. And they took out a part of my parotid gland, stitched me back up, and I went along. So this would have been probably April of 2012. By June of 2012, I started getting a really, really hard lump that was forming underneath my chin. It's getting worse. So I went in, they biopsied it. They determined it was melanoma, and we were trying to figure out what the next plan of attack would be for this. And they determined that they were going to put me on a plan where they were going to do radiation to my neck, throat, and neck. Something that I've heard is, after I did some research and talked to some doctor friends of mine, it can be a really, really tough treatment, and you can lose swallowing function, vocal function. They don't really know what results you are going to get specifically, but it's pretty scary. You're burning all the tissue in your neck area. But one of the things that actually delayed it was the fact that I had not had my wisdom teeth out ever. And so here I am, 45 years old at the time. And they're like, okay, if you have any sort of dental issues, getting radiation to your neck and jaw is just going to make it harder to heal. So I had to delay that process to actually get my wisdom teeth extracted. It's like, okay, well, it was one frustrating that it delayed my whole further next step in my treatment, because on top of that, I think when I had my wisdom teeth extracted, it was a lower one on this side, and I had dry sockets, so that actually even delayed it even more. But here I am. I think I was actually at a conference in San Francisco. I'm a software developer, and I develop apps for iPhone, Android, so forth. And I was at an Apple development conference that year. 2012. And while I was at that conference, that big lump just kept growing underneath my chin. And I'm getting really, really nervous about the whole thing. I'm waiting to heal from wisdom tooth surgery, and also the prospect of going in later June of having the radiation to throat and neck, which is going to be nasty. So I called NIH. So there was a trial that I was familiar with at NIH. Right when I was diagnosed, and going back to 2011, I met someone named Jake who lived actually, I think at the time he was in Bonaire, but he was moving to Boston because he was diagnosed with melanoma, and he was probably about 9 months ahead of me in terms of his diagnosis and the treatments he was going through and so forth. Well, one of the things he did a year before, I was at this Apple Development Conference, was he found this trial at NIH for tumor infiltrating lymphocytes, TIL, adoptive cell therapy at NIH. And so I was following along his journey in this whole thing. Unfortunately, he went through the trial. I think he had some initial success for a few weeks, month, and then it came back with a vengeance. He ultimately passed from it a few months after that, I believe. But in learning about the trial and researching it myself, I was really, really intrigued by it. And the thing that was intriguing to me was the fact that it's such a personalized therapy. Basically, I was using my own immune system to fight my cancer. Although some chemo drugs are involved, it's secondary. It's actually more to knock down your immune system than it is to actually fight your cancer. What's being done is taking your own body cells, your lymphocytes are attacking your specific cancer tumor, whatever mutations might be in it, expanding them, in my case, to 130 billion of them in the lab, and then after knocking down my immune system with the chemotherapy drugs, receiving the infusion of the TILs. The whole process fascinated me at the time, and thought this personalized treatment was really cool. Probably had a chance of working for me. It's a chance of working for anyone. About 25% of us are lucky complete responders. 25 to 30%, I think, are the current statistics. And I think it's actually 56 to 60% that of patients actually do get an objective response from it. Anyway, I decided, okay, when I was at this Apple Developer Conference, I want to try this. There were a couple other trial options available to me at the time. My particular tumor was BRAF positive. So there were, I could have gone, that was actually already FDA approved. I could have gone the BRAF way. There was, I think IPI was just coming out of trial at that time, mid 2012. And there were other like Nivo and Keytruda and so forth that were Pembro that were all still in trial. So I could have opted for those types of immunotherapy drugs, but I really liked the fact that this TIL adoptive cell therapy was personalized and was using my own immune system to fight my cancer. I called up NIH while I was in San Francisco at the conference. I'm like, how do I get into this trial? And so I sent them all my medical records and everything, and they actually invited me out to Washington, D.C. to be evaluated for a trial. So toward the end of June, I underwent my evaluation, and the doctor, Dr. Richard Sherry, told me that he felt that, the trial would be right for me. And he said, but there was one issue. The one issue was I needed to be stage 4. I was still only stage 3. And so it's like, okay, what am I going to do? So he said, I'll tell you what, I'll bring you back in 2.5, 3 weeks for a PET scan. He's like, I can't give you a PET scan while you're here now. He basically said, because of our funding and everything, take an act of Congress to get you the money to get you the PET scan. But if you come back in 2.5, 3 weeks, you'll be able to come back for the PET scan. I waited, here I'm like, okay, I'm in limbo. One of the things about fighting cancer is you're always in these states of limbo where something new comes up and you just don't know which way to turn and how things are going to go. It's like this whole emotional roller coaster. I went back end of June and had the PET scan, and they said, you know what? Your PET scan indicated you had a small nodule in one of your lungs. One of the lungs. So it's like, congratulations, you're stage 4.
You jumped a stage.
You jumped a stage and you qualified for the treatment.
Boom.
So it's like, okay.
That news, that's good.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those really weird things where this is really bad news, but it's good. I qualified, and so then first I had to choose which trial I was going to do. They had like 3 different trials that all made use of TILs. I mean, they were all TILs trial, and one of which was doing TILs with using a BRAF inhibitor. Another trial was doing TILs. I forget what else was part of it, and then there was a third trial, which was more or less what they called the tried and true trial. I think it was a phase 3 trial. The other 2 were still phase 1 or phase 2. And I asked Dr. Sherry, I'm like, I am BRAF positive. Do you think it'd be useful for me to do the one with the BRAF inhibitor where I take the pill for that? Or what should I do? And he's like, if I were you, I'd do the tried and true one. We've been doing this for 5 to 10 years. We're familiar with it. So I opted for that one. So within this particular trial, it was a TIL trial where there would be one arm where half of the patients would receive total body irradiation. What they call, it'd be 12 grays of radiation over 6 treatments, 6 fractions. So you get 2 grays per day over a course of 6 days or something. And the other arm would just have just basic TIL. And I actually ended up being selected, randomized into the one that received the total body irradiation. And one thing to note is I didn't know this at the time. I didn't know this till probably a couple years later, that this particular trial that I was in, I think it had like 220 patients in it, was the first TIL trial for NIH that was actually under the supervision of NIH, but being sponsored or done by, at the time it was called Lion Biotech, which later became Iovance. So this was Iovance's first trial they did for TIL therapy, and they were doing it under the supervision of NIH. NIH was teaching them mostly the lab techniques for isolating and expanding the lymphocytes for attacking the cancer. So one of the things, because I was in the arm that did the total body irradiation, before I did it, I underwent a procedure called apheresis. And what apheresis is, they pull your blood out.
Yep.
Yes.
Double arm.
Yeah, I think so.
4 hours in the chair.
Exactly. You sit there and you just wait for them to basically filter out what they want to filter out of your blood.
Cycle in, cycle out.
So they collected that, and primarily because I was in the radiation arm, to give back to me, and it would help my body, my immune system recover from receiving the radiation. So that was done. I went back to Minneapolis and they had scheduled my, actually, I think that same trip, they may have actually opted to do my surgery too. So one reason why they needed me to be stage 4 as part of their trial is I need to have essentially 2 tumors, one that they could resect or take out of my body so that they could process in the lab to pull out the lymphocytes. The other tumor in my body, which was the one in my lung, they used to track the progress, after I received the therapy to make sure that it was in fact working. So that's why I needed to be stage 4, unfortunately, for the trial. Or fortunately in my case. And so I had the surgery where they removed the huge lump that was underneath my jaw, within my jawbone, and they took it back to the lab. I went back to Minneapolis, and you play this waiting game at this point where they take it back to the lab and they process it. They dissect the tumor, they divide it into different parts. They essentially put it into a multitude of petri dishes with IL-2, which stimulates the cell growth, particularly the lymphocyte growth, and stimulates it to attack the tumor tissue. And so then they keep watching these different petri dishes until they wean it down to I think 4 different petri dishes that are responding the most, to have the lymphocytes that respond the most, can recognize the tumor tissue and cause the T cells to actually attack the tumor tissue. And in my case, a couple weeks after being in the lab, I was told my tumor tissue would be in the lab and me back in Minneapolis. I was called by NIH saying, guess what? We have some good news. Your cells are responding to the tumor tissue and we're going to expand them.
Took them how many weeks to get back to you just to let you know that they're growing?
I think it was 2 or 3. I think it might be 1 or 2. They told me.
They've come a long way since then. And you're thinking man, I would have went nuts waiting that long. That's how long it took them total to grow my cells. If I was waiting that long, I'd be I'm pulling my hair out.
Well, if I think about it, I actually received my cells on August 30th of 2012. I would guess
from the day apheresis and your surgery.
Yes, I would guess that was the 1st or 2nd week of July. So it probably was the end of the week of July 5th. I'd have to look at my curing bridge to verify when it was, but to do the math. So yeah, it was a week or 2. They got back to me and they're like, good news, your cells are responding. And then at that point, once I gave the approval saying, yes, I will go through with this, continued the process where they were expanding them over the next several weeks. And I think they were targeting August 30th as my T+0 day, where I would receive my cells back. And they're like, come back August 15th or so, and we will start the process. And so at that point, in fact, I think maybe that week I was there, that's when they did the apheresis right when I got there. But then a few days after I received, then we went through the preparatory part for an ultimate receiving my cells August 3rd. So I went back. I had the preparatory regime. They used 2 different chemo drugs. And the chemo drugs, like I said earlier, are not for attacking the cancer at all. It's basically to knock down your immune system. So essentially, from NIH's previous studies years back, they had determined that patients respond a lot better to this type of therapy if their immune system has been knocked down. And so the 2 chemos, Cytoxin and fludarabine, I believe, you're given. I forget which order they are.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I know that one of them is so toxic, probably the Cytoxin, that they have to make sure you get a lot of fluids and flush it out of your body because they can't let it sit around too long, otherwise it'll cause too much damage. So then they give you a drug called flusamidide or Lasix. And what Lasix does, it's actually also used for racehorses before races to force them to essentially release their bladder before they do the horse race. The purpose of Lasix is to force you to get fluids out of your body, and you literally piss like a racehorse. And towards the end of that, so because I was in the total body irradiation arm, that's when I would start the radiation. So the radiation would occur over a 6-day period. I'd go in every day for 6 days. So I went in for my first total body irradiation. And when you go in, it's kind of interesting thing. There's operatory, and you are essentially belted down to a bed so that you can't move at all. In fact, there's some sort of mask that they put over your head to hold your head in place. And then within that room is this almost science fiction like big metal projector, which is what they project the radiation from. And they have to aim it precisely where they want to aim. In my case, it was total body, but so the focus was across my entire body. But they also had to make sure they shielded critical parts of your body so it didn't get the radiation. And I was going into my first radiation. In general, one of the physical issues I had, and was not cancer related, I had what's known as frozen shoulder in one of my arms. And so it was very, very painful for me to lift up my arm past a certain degree of freedom. And the way they had to belt me down and position me on this bed was such that it was beyond my range of motion of my arm. And so it was kind of painful for me. And I was expressing some concern about this to the nurse before I went in for my radiation treatment. The day before, they actually had me all marked up and lined properly so that, they put a magic marker on me so that I would be aligned properly. So I knew that there would be pain. And I expressed it to a nurse. I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to last the whole hour of this just to deal with this. And so she's like, oh, I'll give you something that'll take the edge off. So she gave me a Percocet. And the things about me, I don't tolerate narcotics. It's just, I get ill from it and so forth. So anyway,
Man.
I took the Percocet. I went through the treatment. It went fine. Got back to my room. And while in my room, I was standing around and I started feeling ill, felt like I was going to puke, went into the bathroom, puked. I came back into the room and I just passed out right there on the floor of my hospital room. Fortunately, my brother was in the room at the time. He was attending the whole thing, so he calls nurse like, Bill just on the floor. Of course,
Hit the floor.
the nurse came in, and of course she's like, crap, he coded. And so they called code. All the hospital staff, I swear, are in this room. And by that time, I had passed out. I had essentially fainted. I was starting to come out of it and everything. And ultimately, once they figured out I was okay, that I had vasovagal syncope reaction, which is something when I vomit or have certain trauma, I just have a tendency of fainting. And it was just another one of those fainting type episodes. But because I had this and the doctors weren't really sure, they need to confirm that it wasn't something worse, particularly something, heart condition or something more major. They have to rule it out. So what happened? I end up in ICU where they could watch me more carefully and gave me echocardiograms and did these different orthostatic tests, to make sure that as I stand up and sit down and move different positions, that my blood pressure isn't dropping too much. And ultimately they came back and they determined that they couldn't point at anything else. So the history of fainting spells was probably correct. But they kept me in ICU just in case. And while in ICU, they kept me on observation for a few days. And one of my big concerns was, are they kicking me out of the trial? Because they told me I'm not getting any more radiation. I only got one of the 6 for my arm of the trial. It's like, okay, are they kicking me out of the trial? Didn't know. So they wanted to do all their tests and let me recover a little bit and then kind of determine whether or not they were going to proceed. In my concern, so Dr. Stephen Rosenberg, who's the head researcher, he's the godfather of TIL. Basically, he and his research team at NIH invented TIL and IL-2 treatment. So he was the doctor. He's the lead researcher and doctor over my whole trial. So he came into my room and he was talking to me and he said that we've ruled out everything that could with regard to your cardio and other things that would prevent you from doing it. We were going to go ahead with treatment because our whole other arm is such that you don't have any total body irradiation. So we're going to continue. We believe that you will be fine being able to receive the TIL and then go through the next phase with the IL-2. One of the things he said that was really touching was the fact, well, let me step back a little bit because there's a whole nother part of my story. And this isn't specific to me, but this has to do with my wife. So 5 years prior to my diagnosis of melanoma, my wife had metastatic breast cancer. Actually, it was a metastatic. It was confined to the breast. She discovered a lump. She had a double mastectomy, and she went through a Cytoxin treatment, and ultimately she was declared to be in remission, and she was doing well. She basically was going back for her regular checkups and everything. Well, she was having her 5-year checkup right before I was going to DC to NIH to get evaluated. So she went in and got her 5-year checkup. And what they observed in her blood work at the time was that her lymphocytes were low. Her blood was off. They're like, that might be a bad lab result. I mean, just a fluke. You come back in a few weeks and we'll test you again. And so she came out for my evaluation in DC at the end of June of that year. And then I started my whole treatment, the preparatory part, getting the tumor removed and so forth. Well, she stayed back, and she went back a couple weeks later. Once again, her blood markers were even lower than they were before. And they're like, "Ooh, we better do some more investigation in this." And so then she had to have a bone marrow biopsy to check to see what her bone marrow was like. So while I was in DC, she was going in for a bone marrow biopsy.
I was just going to ask, they tap the back of her tailbone for that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I hear that's a very painful process.
I haven't had one, but I watched an interview, the Emily Whitehead Foundation, and I've heard Tom explain how Emily, as a child, had to go through that. And I remember my mom telling me she had to get tested for that at one point. But anybody I've ever heard that's ever had to have that test done, it is a very intense and painful procedure. So I can only imagine, God bless your wife. That's just, I'm just thinking like, oh my God, you're going through this, she's going through that.
Oh yeah. So she gets a bone marrow biopsy. And so I'm about to go back into my own treatment, and she gets the results from her bone marrow biopsy. I was in DC at the time when she was telling me this. And she said, the doctors told me that there's abnormalities in my marrow cells, and I have acute myeloid leukemia, AML. And I'm like, this is just horrible. It's like, okay, I literally asked her, how can you come down with a cancer that's actually more aggressive than what I have? I mean, it's, it was just crazy. So ultimately, she had to begin treatment in Minneapolis for her AML the same time I started my treatment in DC for the TIL treatment. Literally the same day, within a day of each other, we were both going into our respective hospitals. Now, at the time, we have 2 kids, 15-year-old girl, 11-year-old boy, and with both of their parents going into cancer treatment for 2 separate hospitals across the country. It was crazy time in my life. And fortunately, we had lots of friends and family that offered help. We had my mom and my wife's parents watching our house and our kids. But it was crazy. And it was really, really hard on the kids for sure, to see both their parents going through this.
Absolutely.
So fast forward back to when I'm in ICU and Dr. Rosenberg is talking to me, and he basically said, we talked about this. So every day, all the research doctors get together and staff to talk about the different cases that they have and what they plan on doing, what the plan of attack is from that day forward for the next day or so, telling me again. And when they got to my case, there was concern from some of the doctors about me potentially having an undiscovered heart condition and so forth. But I was told that Dr. Rosenberg stood up in that meeting and basically said, we must do what we can for this man because of his kids, because of his family. The kids deserve to at least have one parent, if not both. And we're going to go through with this. So as a result, Dr. Rosenberg was instrumental in convincing the team of doctors that we were going to go forward with for this. And of course, looking back, where are we at? This will be over 12 years later. It was a very good decision. So
Yeah.
for my wife, yeah, I'll skip ahead a little bit for when after I'm released from NIH was like mid-August, and I go back to assist my wife. So here I am as a patient and caregiver in a cancer situation. And so my wife went through various treatments. She spent like 4 of the next 6 months in the hospital and ended up passing away in 23rd, 2013. So I lost my wife about 6 months after I went through my treatment. So going back to getting the TILs. So when I was in the IC, at that point, because I wasn't going through the radiation, it was more like recovery days of sort. On August 30th, in the morning, they brought back the infusion bag, kind of a milky white, yellowish color, 130 billion lymphocytes. And everything that I had done in my own treatment up to that day, it's like I expect to be very, very climatic, exciting and so forth. It was exciting. It's just, they hooked up the bag and it was like any other infusion.
Like you just got fluids.
Yeah, I just got fluids. It didn't really seem like everything I went through was just for this. And they're like, oh, don't worry. The exciting part is about to begin.
Comes the IL-2.
Yeah, then comes the IL-2 phase. And the IL-2 phase, that was definitely the hardest part of the treatment.
I concur.
So they give you what they call high dose IL-2 every 8 hours for pretty much as long as you can tolerate it. And one of the big things, when you start to get it, it's generally not too bad. And then by the time you end it, for me, I was experiencing like major chills, major rigors, like bed shaking rigors.
Yep.
Very, very, I can only imagine how horrible it looked from the outside. And they would bring in nice warm blankets and stuff to help me like relax me. And there are some drugs that they can give you to help take the edge off. But if they don't do it soon enough, it's going to be bad.
You got to kind of catch it
before it gets too bad. And so my first time, I went through the full gamut and effects of it because I didn't know to ask them for the good stuff before it got out of control. But after that, I learned.
Yeah. They tell you, they're like, oh, by the way, we can give you drugs for this. It'll make you feel better.
Yeah.
You're like, thanks for telling me.
So interesting. One thing that really did help me during that whole process was I got into this habit of when they would start the infusion, I basically put on headphones and then I would just blare high energy electronic dance music.
Sounds very familiar.
To have something to focus on while this whole process was going on. Just loud, banging music. Yes, exactly. It was my rave, and that got me through it. And so I think they cut me off after about 5 doses of it. They're like, okay, because they try to take you to your edge, because each time it gets a little progressively worse, but they don't want to cause what's known as a cytokine storm, which basically would cause your whole immune system to go apeshit.
Yeah. They want that release. They want you to take you up to the edge and have you look over it, but they don't want you falling off the edge.
Right.
Well put.
And so part of the whole IL-2 process, for those who don't know, is basically think of it as like jump-starting your immune system. So you get your new immune system, you get, in my case, 130 billion lymphocytes to an already weak immune system, or my immune system isn't strong enough to attack anything that's put into it. And then they give you the IL-2, which stimulates it to reboot your immune system. And the rebooting process is crazy. And that's by far the toughest part of the TILs treatment.
I agree.
But if you look at, for me, I think I had like 5 doses before they stopped it. So 5 times 8 hours, that's 40 hours. So that's like 2.5, 3 days. So it was, for me, it was just about 3 days where this happened. They actually, between my first and second dose, because because of my previous situation where they were concerned about my heart, they did some extra tests after the first round just to make sure that everything was hunky-dory. But it was about 3 days for me where I go through this 8-hour cycle of the IL. The interesting thing is after that, you go through that phase, it's pretty much strictly recovery.
All right, that concludes today's episode of TIL Talks with Chris White as we talk TILs, tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes, and all advanced cell and gene therapies. As a reminder, I am not a medical professional or medical expert. I am only a professional and expert on my story and my experience. If you are needing or seeking medical advice or assistance, please reach out to your care team. I'd like to thank my guest today for joining me on TIL Talks. Remember, this was just part 1 out of 2. Stay tuned for part 2. It's coming up next. To our listeners who have not yet done so already, please follow, comment, subscribe, share, and smash that like button. For more information about TIL Talks and related resources, please visit www.tiltalks.com. I'm Chris White. As always, sending love to everybody. Peace.